Early morning. I'm watering the vines when sirens hit. Not one cop car, two. Lights flashing, screaming down my dirt road. I step out, hands dirty, old boots. There she stands, Renata Holloway, new HOA queen. White sundress, Chanel shades, red lipstick, smug, I already won smirk. She points right at me.
30 days to clear this mess, or court.
I stay quiet, not scared. I'm staring past her at the endless grape rows, vines my grandpa planted at 72 with shaky hands, land he bought with a lifetime of savings. His dying words, "Don't let anyone take this from you, not 1 inch." She bought the lot next door. Her condo project only profits if my vineyard vanishes. So she's swinging HOA rules and cops like a hammer. But she missed one huge detail. This land was never in her HOA, not a single day. When those officers check the map, her face will drain to white in seconds. What would you do if someone tried to steal your family legacy? Let me take you back to 2009. My grandfather, Elbert Winslow, bought 43 acres of rocky red clay hillside outside Charlottesville, Virginia, for what he called a stupid price. He wasn't wrong. The land had been used for cattle that didn't particularly want to be there. The fencing was rusted, and the old farmhouse smelled like a combination of motor oil and regret. But Grandpa Elbert had a vision. He'd tasted Virginia wines on a trip to the Shenandoah Valley, driven home with 2 cases rattling in his truck bed, and decided that the rolling hills behind his property were wasted on cows. He planted his first vines the following spring, 12 rows of Cabernet Franc and a stubborn block of Viognier that he'd been warned wouldn't survive the elevation. The Viognier thrived. Grandpa Elbert took that personally, like the land was proving something to him. He passed in 2017, leaving the property to my father, who passed it to me 2 years later, when his knees decided farming was a young man's game. By 2021, Winslow Ridge Vineyard had a tasting room, a seasonal event license, a wine club with 300 members, and a reputation for a dry rosé that a DC food blogger had called shockingly good for something that doesn't cost $40. We framed that. It hangs above the bar. Here's what you need to understand about the geography, because it matters enormously later. Our property sits on a county road, State Route 614, about a quarter-mile outside the incorporated boundary of Ridgecrest Estates, a planned residential community that went up in the early 2000s, when a developer named Fletcher Grimes decided the area needed more beige houses and restrictive covenants. Ridgecrest has a homeowners association. It has rules about grass height, paint colors, the exact dimensions of holiday wreaths, and apparently the spiritual purity of everything within a 5-mile radius of its entrance gate. We are not in Ridgecrest. We have never been in Ridgecrest. Our deed, our tax parcel, our zoning classification, none of it touches Ridgecrest Estates. We are, in the language of county planning documents, an agricultural operation on unincorporated land. This distinction will become the most important 7 words in this entire story. Enter Renata Holloway. Renata moved into Ridgecrest Estates in 2019, bought a 4-bedroom colonial with a 3-car garage, and, apparently, a mandate from God to fix everyone else's choices. Within 6 months, she'd been elected to the HOA board. Within a year, she was president. By the time she set her sights on us, she'd already successfully pressured a neighbor into removing a vegetable garden from their front yard, fined a retired schoolteacher for having wind chimes that were, quote, audibly disruptive during association-designated quiet hours, and sent a cease and desist to a family whose American flag was 3 inches wider than permitted. The woman had a gift. The first time I heard her name was a Tuesday in late April, when my vineyard manager, a no-nonsense former Army sergeant named Boyd Callahan, walked into the tasting room holding a piece of paper like it had personally offended him. "You get a letter from somebody named Holloway?" he said. I had not opened my mail that day. The letter, printed on HOA letterhead, with a gold-embossed logo that I can only describe as aggressively self-important, informed me that Winslow Ridge Vineyard was in violation of Ridgecrest Estates Community Standards, Section 4.2, regarding commercial noise and traffic disruption affecting residential quality of life. It demanded that we cease weekend events, reduce operating hours to before 4 p.m., and submit a remediation plan within 30 days. There was a phone number at the bottom. It was Renata Holloway's direct line. Boyd looked at me. I looked at Boyd. "She thinks she runs us," he said. "She thinks a lot of things," I said. I should have called the county planning office that same afternoon. I didn't. I thought it would just go away. It did not go away. I made the classic mistake of polite people everywhere. I assumed good faith. I called Renata Holloway's number the next morning, standing in the vineyard rows with dew still on the leaves, and the early smell of turned earth mixing with the faint sweetness of last season's oak barrels airing out near the winery door. It was the kind of morning that makes you feel generous. I was prepared to be reasonable. She answered on the second ring. "This is Renata." I introduced myself, told her I'd received the letter, explained, calmly, that I believed there might be a misunderstanding about our property's relationship to the HOA. There was a pause, the kind of pause that isn't uncertainty, it's performance. "Mr. Winslow," she said, "the Ridgecrest Estates community standards apply to all properties that impact the quality of life of our residents. That includes adjacent and nearby commercial operations." I blinked at a grapevine. "That's not how property law works," I said. "Our legal counsel disagrees." I asked her to send me whatever documentation supported the HOA's claim of jurisdiction over my property. She said she'd have her assistant follow up. The assistant never followed up. What followed up instead, 3 days later, was a second letter, this one escalating the violation to level 2 status, which apparently meant they were now threatening to pursue all available legal remedies. I'll be honest with you, I still wasn't worried. I'd been a property owner long enough to know that threatening letters from HOAs are the adult equivalent of a kid yelling, "I'm telling my mom." The threat is scarier than the reality most of the time, so I went back to running a vineyard. We had a spring wine club release weekend coming up, our biggest event of the early season, with about 90 guests pre-registered, a food truck from a local smokehouse, and a bluegrass trio that Boyd had been bragging about since January. The gravel lot crunched under the food truck's tires when it pulled in Friday afternoon, and the whole property smelled like hickory smoke and new-mown grass by the time the first guests arrived. It was, genuinely, a perfect afternoon. And then Renata Holloway arrived. She did not have a ticket. She did not have a reservation. What she had was a clipboard, a cell phone held up like a weapon, and 2 of her neighbors, both also HOA board members, a man named Douglas Fitch and a woman named Pamela Sorrento, trailing behind her like remoras on a particularly uptight shark. Boyd intercepted them at the gate. "Private event," he said. "You need a ticket." "We're here on HOA business," Renata said. "You don't have HOA business here," Boyd said. The conversation went nowhere productive. Renata filmed the parking area, filmed the food truck, filmed the entrance sign, filmed Boyd's face, and announced loudly enough for nearby guests to hear that this operation was in direct violation of community standards and subject to immediate remediation proceedings. One of our wine club members, a retired civil engineer named Harlan Dietz, who has been coming to our releases since the first year, walked up next to Boyd and looked at Renata for a long moment. "Who are you?" he asked. "I'm the president of Ridgecrest Estates HOA." "Where's Ridgecrest Estates?" She pointed down the road. "That's a quarter mile that way," Harlan said. He wasn't being aggressive, he was just being a civil engineer, precise, factual, and slightly baffling to anyone who operates on vibes alone. Renata ignored him and turned back to me. "Mr. Winslow, I'm formally notifying you that this event constitutes a violation of—" "You need to leave," I said. It was the first time I'd said it directly. I watched her register the shift. "Excuse me? You're not a guest. You weren't invited. This is private property. You need to leave." She left, but she filmed the whole walk back to her car, and she posted the footage online that same evening, with a caption describing Winslow Ridge as a noise and traffic hazard operating in defiance of community governance. 47 people in the Ridgecrest Estates Facebook group liked the post. 3 of them were from a neighboring county and had no idea why they were there, but the algorithm had suggested it, and here we all were. Here's where I made mistake number 2. I posted a response, polite, factual, explaining that we were outside HOA jurisdiction. The comment section treated this as an invitation. By Monday morning, Renata had filed a formal complaint with the county zoning office, contacted our event insurance provider with concerns about liability exposure, and sent a letter to the Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services suggesting our agricultural exemption was improperly claimed. She was playing chess while I was still playing checkers. Time to get a better game. The county zoning office complaint was a nuisance, but it was also a gift, because it forced me to do something I should have done 2 months earlier. I called an attorney. Her name was Cecily Drummond, and she ran a small practice out of Waynesboro that specialized in agricultural property rights and what she cheerfully described as telling HOAs what they can and cannot do, which is usually a shorter conversation than they expect. A friend in the local farm bureau had recommended her. I drove out on a Wednesday, sat across from her in an office decorated with framed soil survey maps and a needlepoint that said, "Easements are forever," and explained the situation. Cecily listened. Then she asked to see my deed, my tax parcel map, and the HOA's governing documents. I had the first two. She obtained the third from the county recorder's office within 24 hours. The result was exactly what I'd suspected, but needed confirmed in writing. Winslow Ridge Vineyard bore absolutely zero legal relationship to Ridgecrest Estates HOA. Our parcel was not now, nor had it ever been, subject to their declaration of covenants, conditions, and restrictions. In the legal vernacular, they had no authority over us. None. The HOA's jurisdiction ended at their recorded plat boundary, a line that ran along the eastern shoulder of State Route 614 and stopped well short of our entrance gate. "Can she keep filing complaints?" I asked. "She can file whatever she wants," Cecily said. "Filing a complaint doesn't mean the complaint has merit. What concerns me more is the pattern, the insurance inquiry, the VDACS letter. She's not trying to win legally. She's trying to make operating your business expensive and exhausting. There's a term for this: vexatious litigation, the strategy of using process as punishment. Takeaway: if someone is filing multiple groundless complaints across multiple agencies, document everything: dates, contents, your responses, because that paper trail becomes evidence of harassment. Cecily drafted a formal response to the zoning office, documenting our parcel boundary, our agricultural zoning classification, and our valid event license. She also sent a letter directly to Renata Holloway and the HOA's legal counsel, a firm in Roanoke that apparently split its practice between HOA enforcement and personal injury, putting them on notice that any further unsolicited contact with our business partners, insurers, or regulatory agencies would be treated as tortious interference. Tortious interference: when a third party intentionally damages your business relationships. It's actionable. Takeaway: if an HOA or neighbor contacts your business partners to damage those relationships without legal basis, that can be grounds for a civil lawsuit. Renata's response to the letter was to double down. She organized a neighborhood meeting, held in the Ridgecrest Estates clubhouse, a beige building with fake shutters that had never shut anything, and presented what she called a dossier on Winslow Ridge Vineyard. I heard about this secondhand from a Ridgecrest resident named Tilford Crane, a quiet, retired electrician who'd bought a membership to our wine club specifically because he liked the Cabernet and did not enjoy being told what to like by his HOA president. Tilford called me the morning after the meeting. She had printouts, he said. County traffic data, noise decibel charts, a map with your property circled in red. She told everyone that the vineyard was decreasing property values and that she was pursuing all available channels to shut it down. How many people were there? Maybe 30, but Garrett, about half of them looked uncomfortable. She's losing people. That was interesting. She also, Tilford continued, suggested that the vineyard attracted a certain type of visitor that wasn't in keeping with community character. I let that sit for a moment. What type of visitor? Tilford paused. She didn't say exactly, but the implication was clear. There it was, the subtle undertone that had been humming beneath this whole campaign from the beginning. Renata Holloway wasn't just worried about noise or traffic. She was worried about who was coming to the vineyard, our wine club, which looked like the cross-section of any rural Virginia community you'd care to find. Farmers, teachers, retired military, small business owners, A few folks who drove up from Richmond on the weekends. Mixed, diverse, unpretentious. Not her crowd. I called Cecily that afternoon and told her what Tilford said. "Keep a record of that," she said immediately. "If she ever makes that implication publicly or in writing, it changes the nature of what she's doing significantly." I started keeping a very detailed notebook. May turned to June. The vines were chest high. The air smelled of warm grass and the faint diesel exhaust of the tractor Boyd used to run cultivation passes between the rows, and Renata Holloway escalated again. She found a new weapon, the County Board of Supervisors. Specifically, she found Supervisor Gerald Pruitt, a man who had been on the board for 16 years and operated on the principle that whoever made the loudest noise in his district deserved the most attention. Renata made very loud noise. She showed up to a June board meeting with a prepared statement, a petition signed by 62 Ridgecrest residents, and a request that the county conduct a comprehensive review of Winslow Ridge Vineyard's event license, noise ordinance compliance, and traffic impact on State Route 614. I found out about the board meeting the day before it happened. Cecily scrambled to prepare a response. I drove to the county seat the next morning in a truck that needed an alignment, drank bad coffee from a machine in the hallway, and sat in a wooden chair that had been uncomfortable since approximately 1987. Renata spoke for 8 minutes. She used phrases like community character, undue burden, and good faith concerns of longtime residents. She had a PowerPoint. Supervisor Pruitt nodded along like she was explaining gravity. Then I spoke. I kept it to 4 minutes. I had Cecily's legal memo about our jurisdiction status. I had our event license, our agricultural exemption documentation, and our noise compliance records. We'd had a sound level meter running at property boundaries for every event since April, a precaution Cecily had suggested, and we'd never exceeded 65 decibels at the property line, which is quieter than a normal conversation at close range. I also had a letter from the Virginia Farm Bureau supporting our classification as an agricultural tourism operation, a category protected under Virginia's Right to Farm Act, which limits local government's ability to restrict agricultural operations that predate residential development in the area. The Right to Farm Act. Most states have one. It's designed to prevent exactly this dynamic, residential expansion encroaching on existing farms, and then using local political pressure to regulate those farms out of existence. Takeaway: if you own agricultural land, know your state's right to farm statute. It may be your strongest shield. The board voted to take no action. Supervisor Pruitt looked annoyed. Renata looked like she'd bitten into something sour. But she wasn't done. The week after the board meeting, our food truck partner, Marcus Webb, who ran Ridgeback Smokehouse and had been our Friday vendor for 2 seasons, called me looking uncomfortable. "Garrett, I got a call from a woman named Holloway. She told me that our partnership was creating liability exposure for my business, and that she'd be documenting our presence at your events." "She has no authority to do that," I said. "I know. But she also called my commissary kitchen and suggested they review whether my license covered events at wineries." I breathed slowly. "Marcus, she's bluffing. I know that too, but I've got a family, man. I've got margins. I can't spend money I don't have defending myself from somebody's phone calls." Marcus pulled out for the summer. I didn't blame him. And that's when I got genuinely angry. Not the hot, reactive kind of angry, the cold, organized kind. The kind where you stop reacting and start planning. Boyd could read it immediately. He's known me since I was helping Grandpa Elbert string trellis wire, and he's learned to distinguish between my normal, frustrated face and my something's about to happen face. "You're done waiting?" he said one evening, the two of us on the covered porch of the winery, watching the last light go gold over the vines. "I've been defending," I said. "It's time to do something else." "What kind of something?" I took a sip of the Viognier we'd been working on. It was cold, slightly floral, with that mineral backbone that Grandpa Elbert's hillside always produced. The kind where I stopped letting her choose the terrain. Boyd considered this, nodded once. "I'll get the files," he said. "Here's what happens when you actually start digging." Cecily had been doing her own research, partly because she was thorough, and partly because, as she put it, people who behave like Renata Holloway usually have a reason beyond the stated one. She'd been pulling public records, HOA financials, meeting minutes, property transaction records in the Ridgecrest area. She called me on a Thursday afternoon in late June. I was in the barrel room, doing a racking on the new Cab Franc vintage. The smell of young wine and oak staves is something you never quite get used to, rich and slightly sharp, like fruit at the edge of fermentation. "Garrett," Cecily said, "you need to come see something." I drove to Waynesboro the next morning. What she'd found started with a deed and led to something considerably more interesting. 3 years earlier, Fletcher Grimes, the original developer of Ridgecrest Estates, had sold the remaining undeveloped parcels in the community to a holding company called Ridgecrest Land Partners LLC. That LLC had 2 members, a real estate investment group out of Richmond, and a silent partner listed only as an initial in the operating agreement. Cecily had traced the silent partner through state corporate filings. The silent partner was Renata Holloway. But here's where it got useful. One of those undeveloped parcels, Lot 47 in the Ridgecrest Plat, sat adjacent to State Route 614, directly across from the entrance to Winslow Ridge Vineyard. And Ridgecrest Land Partners had, 18 months ago, submitted a preliminary application to the county for a residential subdivision development on that parcel. A subdivision that, based on the traffic study submitted with the application, had modeled its infrastructure assumptions on the assumption that Winslow Ridge Vineyard would no longer be operating as an event venue. Let me say that again more slowly. Renata Holloway had a financial stake in a development that was premised, in its own traffic study, on my business being shut down. She had not disclosed this conflict of interest in any of her HOA filings, her board presentations, her county supervisor complaint, or any of her correspondence. She had been using her position as HOA president as a tool to protect and advance a personal real estate investment. This was not just petty, this was potentially fraud. Cecily laid it out on her conference table. The corporate filings, the LLC operating agreement, the subdivision application, the traffic study. It was quiet in the office. I could hear the ceiling fan turning. "Can we use this?" I said. "In multiple ways," Cecily said. "First, the HOA's own governing documents require board members to disclose financial conflicts of interest and recuse themselves from related decisions. She's violated that repeatedly. Second, the county subdivision application was made with a material assumption, your closure, that may constitute a misrepresentation to the planning department. Third, the tortious interference claim we were already building just got considerably stronger, because now we can show motive." "When do we move?" Cecily smiled. She had the expression of someone who had been waiting for a client to ask exactly that question. "Not yet," she said. "We do this once, we do it right, and we do it in public." I thought about Marcus Webb pulling his food truck. I thought about Tilford Crane's careful, quiet phone call. I thought about 30 Ridgecrest residents sitting in a beige clubhouse, being told my vineyard attracted the wrong kind of people. "Okay," I said, "let's build something." The next 6 weeks were the most useful of the whole ordeal. We called it, between me, Boyd, Cecily, and the small group of allies we'd quietly assembled, getting the house in order. The phrase was Boyd's. He'd used it in the Army to describe the period before an operation, where you quietly ensure every moving part is ready, every contingency is anticipated, and nothing is left to improvise under pressure. First, the legal architecture. Cecily filed an amended tortious interference complaint in circuit court, not yet served, just drafted and ready. It named Renata Holloway personally, named Ridgecrest Land Partners LLC, and documented every documented instance of third-party interference. The insurance inquiry, the VDACS letter, the call to Marcus Webb's commissary kitchen, the supplier contacts we documented but not yet publicized. The damages estimate, based on lost revenue from our canceled summer vendor partnerships and documented wine club membership churn in the months of the campaign, came to just under $47,000. That number's conservative, Cecily noted. It doesn't include the application to develop Lot 47, which we'd argue should be voided on misrepresentation grounds. Takeaway: document every loss caused by a bad faith campaign against your business. Lost partnerships, lost customers, staff hours spent responding to complaints. All of it is potentially recoverable in a tortious interference suit. Second, the county records strategy. Cecily submitted a Freedom of Information Act request to the County Planning Department for all communications related to the Ridgecrest Land Partners Lot 47 application, internal emails, staff notes, any correspondence with outside parties. Virginia has a strong FOIA statute, and the county had to respond within 5 working days. What came back included an email from an address registered to R. Holloway, suggesting that the Vineyard's event license should be subject to additional review given ongoing community concerns. She'd been lobbying the planning staff directly, without disclosure. We added it to the file. Third, the community. Tilford Crane had been quietly talking to his neighbors, not agitating, just planting seeds of doubt about Renata's motives. He'd shared nothing about the LLC discovery. That was Cecily's explicit instruction. But he'd asked simple questions at the right moments. Why is she so focused on the vineyard specifically? Have you seen the Lot 47 application? Did anyone disclose a conflict? People who'd been nodding along with Renata started to look uncertain. Harlan Dietz, our retired civil engineer, did something quietly remarkable. He submitted public comments on the Lot 47 subdivision application, challenging the traffic study's baseline assumptions. His comments ran to 11 pages, cited 3 Virginia Department of Transportation standards, and essentially documented that the study was methodologically compromised because it had assumed the removal of an operating business without evidence that removal was legally achievable. The planning department's staff engineer flagged the application for additional review. The Lot 47 application was quietly placed on administrative hold. Renata didn't know why yet. Fourth, the event. We had our annual harvest preview party scheduled for late August, a ticketed event, about 150 guests, always our best attended summer gathering. We'd been planning it for months. Boyd had rebuilt the outdoor stage platform, strung new Edison lights through the vine rows, and arranged for 4 local food vendors, including, quietly, Marcus Webb, who'd agreed to come back when I explained what we'd found, and promised his involvement would be handled through a formal vendor agreement that included our legal protection. We sent out the invitations. We also, through Tilford, made sure the date was known in Ridgecrest Estates. We invited the county planning director, a methodical woman named Sybil Prather, as a guest of the Virginia Farm Bureau. She accepted. We invited the local newspaper, the Albemarle Register, and pitched the editor on a feature about agricultural tourism in the county. The reporter, a young woman named Dex Holloway, no relation, which I found funny, came out the week before for a background interview. We also made sure our event notification, required under our license, was filed with the county sheriff's office in the standard way. Nothing unusual, just routine paperwork. And then we waited. The last thing I did the week before the event was walk the vineyard at dusk, the way Grandpa Elbert used to do. The Cab Franc rows were heavy, the clusters dark and tight, the air smelling of ripening fruit and something earthier underneath, loam and slow decay, and all the biological commerce that makes wine possible. The Edison lights weren't on yet, but you could see where they'd hang, tracing the rows into the evening. It was going to be a good harvest, and a very educational evening. Renata wasn't sitting still. I think she could feel something shifting. In her board meetings, in the conversations that stopped when she walked into the Ridgecrest clubhouse, in the way Tilford Crane and 2 or 3 other residents had started asking pointed questions about the HOA's financial disclosures at the monthly meetings. She didn't know what we knew, but she knew the wind had changed. Her response was to accelerate. 10 days before the harvest preview, she appeared at the Albemarle Register offices and asked to speak with the editor. I heard about this from Dex, who called me afterward with an air of someone who has just watched something instructive. She came in and asked us to kill the story, Dex told me. What reason did she give? She said it was one-sided, that you'd cultivated a relationship with the reporter, me, and that the vineyard had ongoing regulatory issues that the paper should investigate instead of platform. Did she provide any documentation of these regulatory issues? She provided a printout of her own HOA complaints, which, as I had to explain to her, are not regulatory findings. How did she take that? She asked to speak with the publisher. The publisher wasn't in. She left a voicemail. The voicemail, Dex told me later, included a suggestion that the Register's coverage of local agricultural businesses had been suspiciously favorable and that she intended to document a pattern of bias. The publisher, a taciturn former wire service reporter named Grayson Falk, who had survived 3 decades of people trying to kill stories he believed in, called Renata back personally and told her the story would run. The story was now going to be longer. Meanwhile, on the regulatory front, Renata made her most aggressive move yet. She contacted our event liability insurance carrier, not with vague concerns this time, but with a formal written statement claiming that Winslow Ridge Vineyard was operating in violation of local ordinances, that it had been the subject of multiple regulatory complaints, and that she was formally advising them of potential liability exposure. Our insurance carrier, a regional agricultural specialty insurer we'd been with for 6 years, sent us a letter requesting documentation in response. They were not canceling coverage. They were doing due diligence. But the process cost us 2 weeks of back and forth and required Cecily to write a detailed response with supporting documentation. Cecily's invoice for that month was not small. But here's what Renata didn't know. When an insurance carrier receives a formal written statement like the one she sent, they create a record. That record becomes part of any subsequent claims or litigation history. And the statement she'd sent, we obtained a copy, contained several factual misrepresentations, including the claim that we had active violations pending with the county, when in fact the county had closed every complaint she'd filed. We added it to Cecily's file. The tortious interference damages estimate climbed past $52,000. 5 days before the event, something unexpected happened. Douglas Fitch, Renata's fellow board member and her most loyal ally, quietly resigned from the Ridgecrest HOA board. He sent his resignation letter to all board members and, apparently, accidentally replied to the full community email list. The letter didn't explain much, just personal reasons, and thanks for the opportunity to serve. But Tilford Crane called me within an hour. He asked Renata about the LLC, Tilford said, at the last board meeting, before anyone else arrived. I was in the room setting up chairs. He asked her directly whether she had a financial interest in properties adjacent to the issues the HOA had been pursuing. What did she say? She told him it was none of his business. Douglas Fitch had been on that board for 4 years. He'd been her second vote on every motion, her supporting voice in every contentious meeting. After that conversation, he resigned within 48 hours. Some people, when confronted with information they can't unknow, make quiet choices. Fitch made his. I didn't agree with how long he'd gone along with things, but I respected the exit. Renata now had a board with 1 vacancy, a newspaper story incoming, an administrative hold on her Lot 47 application, and at least a few neighbors who were asking questions she didn't want to answer. She did what cornered people sometimes do. She decided the best defense was an overwhelming offense. She called the Albemarle County Sheriff's Office the day before our harvest preview and filed a complaint alleging that our event constituted a public nuisance, that we had exceeded our license capacity at previous events, and that she had reason to believe we would be serving alcohol to minors. The Sheriff's Office, being the Sheriff's Office, noted the complaint and dispatched 2 deputies to observe the event. She thought that would rattle us. She'd handed us exactly what we needed. The morning of the harvest preview, I was up before dawn, not from anxiety, from the particular animal alertness of someone who has prepared carefully and is now watching the clock. Boyd was already in the vineyard when I came out, walking the rows in the gray pre-dawn light, checking the festival lighting, testing the stage power. His boots crunched on the gravel path. You could smell the dew and the ripe fruit, and from the direction of the road, the very faint exhaust of the first food truck arriving early to set up. We had everything in order. The legal file, copies of all HOA complaints, all regulatory responses, the LLC documentation, the corporate filings, Renata's insurance letter with its misrepresentations, the Lot 47 application with the traffic study, Harlan Dietz's technical comments, and the FOIA emails, was organized in a banker's box in my office. Cecily had a full copy. The register's Dex Holloway had been provided a media packet the previous day, under embargo until the event. County Planning Director Sybil Prather was confirmed for 5 p.m., arriving as a guest of the Farm Bureau. She'd been briefed, diplomatically, carefully, on the general outline of the Lot 47 situation by Harlan Dietz, who had a prior professional relationship with her office. She knew there were questions. She didn't yet know the full shape of them. Tilford Crane had personally spoken to 11 Ridgecrest residents who planned to attend the event, not as protesters or partisans, just as neighbors who made wine club memberships and had, over the preceding weeks, started asking uncomfortable questions. They'd be there. They'd see what there was to see. And then there were the 2 sheriff's deputies, dispatched on Renata's nuisance complaint. I'd called the sheriff's office that morning and spoken with the supervising sergeant, a straightforward man named Sergeant Dalton, to confirm the situation. I told him we were aware of the complaint, that we welcomed the observation, and that I wanted to flag a few things in advance. I sent him, by email, our event license, our noise compliance records, our insurance documentation, our property boundary survey showing our relationship to the Ridgecrest plat, and Cecily's legal memo on HOA jurisdiction. Sergeant Dalton read it. He called me back 20 minutes later. "Just to confirm," he said, "your property has no legal relationship to this HOA." "Correct," I said. "And all your licenses and compliance records are current." "All current. I'll have hard copies at the event." There was a pause. "Mr. Winslow, I'm going to be honest with you. This complaint reads like a neighbor dispute, not a law enforcement matter. My deputies will come out, they'll observe, and if everything's in order, they'll be on their way." "I appreciate that," I said. "I'd actually appreciate it if they stayed a while. There may be something worth seeing." Another pause. "That's so?" "Yes, sir." I could hear him deciding something. "I'll tell them to park at the entrance and introduce themselves." "Perfect." I hung up, poured a cup of coffee, and walked out to the covered porch of the winery. The morning was warming up fast, the kind of August day that starts with mist and becomes blazing blue by noon. The vine rows ran away from me down the hill, heavy and green, and somewhere in the distance Boyd was whistling something tuneless while he worked. Meanwhile, across the road and a quarter-mile away, Renata Holloway was preparing for what she thought would be a day of consequences for Garrett Winslow. She planned to arrive at the event with 2 board members, her attorney on speakerphone, and documentation of what she called pattern violations. She had told at least 3 Ridgecrest residents that she expected the sheriff's deputies to take action at the event. She had drafted a press release, we learned this later, declaring a community victory in what she called the ongoing effort to protect residential quality of life. She had also, and this is the part that still makes me shake my head, called the local television news desk and suggested they send a camera crew to cover what she characterized as a showdown between a rogue commercial operation and community residents who've had enough. The television station sent a camera crew. I only found out about the camera crew an hour before the event started, when Dex texted me, "Heads up, Channel 7 just pulled into your driveway. Looks like someone tipped them." I texted back, "Good." Boyd materialized at my shoulder. "Camera crew just pulled in." "I know." "You're smiling," he said. "Little bit." He nodded slowly. "Renata's coming too. I just saw her car turn off the main road." I set down my coffee cup. "Then let's get started." By 5 o'clock, Winslow Ridge Vineyard was alive. 147 guests moved through the vine rows and the festival area, which Boyd had lit with the Edison strings running in golden arcs above the gravel paths. The 4 food vendors, Marcus Webb's Ridgeback Smokehouse prominent among them, his rig sending hickory smoke across the whole property, had lines stretching back from their windows. The Bluegrass Band, 3 guys from Staunton who played like they were born in a barn and educated in Carnegie Hall, had the area in front of the stage full. You could feel the bass notes in your chest, feel the gravel underfoot, smell the smoke and the wine and the hot August night beginning to settle in. The 2 sheriff's deputies, professional, relaxed, doing exactly what Sergeant Dalton had promised, were parked near the entrance, having already reviewed our license documentation and spent 20 minutes talking to Cecily, who had introduced herself by explaining she was on-site legal counsel and handing them a summary packet. One deputy had put the packet in his shirt pocket. The other was, by that point, eating a smoked brisket sandwich from Marcus Webb's truck. Channel 7's camera crew had set up near the entrance, filming the arrivals. The reporter, who had been briefed by nobody and was working from Renata's tip alone, was talking to guests, looking for the story she'd been promised. Confrontation, violations, chaos. She was finding a really nice outdoor wine event. Renata arrived at 5:15. She came with Pamela Sorrento, her last remaining board ally after Douglas Fitch's departure, and a man I didn't recognize who was carrying a leather portfolio and had the look of someone billing by the hour. The attorney on retainer, presumably. She'd actually brought him in person this time. She walked through the entrance, our entrance, on our property, and her eyes swept the scene. The lights, the crowd, the vendors, the band, the deputies near the gate. She clearly hadn't expected the deputies to look relaxed. She clearly hadn't expected the camera crew to be filming happy guests. She hadn't expected the scene to look, frankly, wonderful. She'd expected chaos. She'd delivered the press. I let her get 20 feet inside before I walked up. "Renata," I said, "I'm glad you're here. There's something I'd like to show you." She started in immediately. Formal notification, violations, her attorney. But I held up a hand and said, "Cecily, could you come over here?" Cecily walked up with her file folder. County Planning Director Sybil Prather was a few steps behind her, having been walking toward us anyway. The Channel 7 camera crew, alert to the developing situation, began moving in that direction. Cecily spoke first, calmly and clearly, because that's how she does everything. "Ms. Holloway, I want to serve you with something." She handed Renata's attorney a document. "This is a civil complaint for tortious interference, filed in Albemarle Circuit Court yesterday. It names you personally and Ridgecrest Land Partners, LLC. The attorney opened the portfolio and began reading. "Additionally," Cecily continued, "I want to make sure County Planning Director Prather is aware of certain information relevant to the Lot 47 subdivision application, specifically that one of the applicants, Ridgecrest Land Partners, LLC, shares a member with the HOA president, who filed multiple complaints and regulatory inquiries designed to support the application's baseline assumptions about this vineyard's operational status." Sybil Prather's expression shifted. She turned to look at Renata directly. The Channel 7 camera was rolling. Renata's attorney leaned in and said something in her ear. Her face, which had arrived confident and arrived ready to perform, was doing something complicated. The color moved through it in stages. "This is," she started. "The documentation is in the packet your attorney is holding," Cecily said pleasantly. "The LLC filing is public record," Harlan Dietz said, appearing from somewhere in the crowd with the unhurried energy of a man who has been right about structural questions his entire career. "The traffic study is a public document. The timestamps on your HOA filings are public record. These things are not hard to find." Tilford Crane was standing behind Harlan, and behind Tilford were 8 or 9 Ridgecrest residents who had come tonight not as supporters of any side, but as people who had started asking questions and wanted to see how the answers landed. They were landing now, audibly. Renata turned to the deputies. "Are you going to do something?" One deputy, the one without the brisket sandwich, looked at her steadily. "Ma'am, we reviewed the property documentation this afternoon. This business is operating fully within its license parameters. We don't have any enforcement action here." "They have no jurisdiction over your property?" the Channel 7 reporter asked me, apparently deciding to just ask the question directly. "None whatsoever," I said. "Never did." There was a pause. The band was playing something warm and easy. The Edison lights were gold in the evening air. The smell of hickory smoke moved across the whole scene like a benediction. Renata Holloway stood in the middle of a party she'd tried to destroy, holding a lawsuit, surrounded by cameras, in front of her own neighbors, and she had nothing left to say. Her attorney touched her arm. They left. The camera crew stayed for another hour and filmed the party. The Channel 7 piece aired 3 days later. It was not the story Renata had called them to cover. It was, instead, a 4-minute segment on a local winery's fight to stay open, against what the reporter described as a campaign by an HOA president with a financial stake in the outcome. The segment showed the party, the event license documentation, the Lloyd 47 application, and Sybil Prather, filmed separately, professionally, confirming that the planning department had placed the subdivision application on hold pending a conflict of interest review. Renata did not comment on camera. Her attorney issued a brief written statement describing the lawsuit as without merit. Cecily responded in a single sentence. 6 weeks later, Renata Holloway resigned as president of the Ridgecrest Estates HOA. The resignation letter, which Tilford Crane shared with me, he was now on the board, elected in a special vote to fill the vacancy, cited personal and professional obligations. It did not mention the lawsuit, the LLC, or the subdivision application. It thanked the community for the opportunity to serve. The HOA's legal counsel contacted Cecily in October to open settlement discussions. We settled in December. The terms are confidential, but I can tell you that Marcus Webb got a call from me on December 23rd, and whatever I said made him laugh for about 30 seconds, and then go very quiet in the way people do when something lands. The Lot 47 application was formally withdrawn in January. The parcel, as far as I know, remains undeveloped. Harlan Dietz still submits comments on planning applications. He does it as a hobby now. But here's the part of this story I care most about telling you. Somewhere in the middle of all of it, in the weeks when I was driving to Waynesboro and drafting responses and logging complaint timestamps, I had a long conversation with Tilford Crane about why Renata's campaign had found any traction at all, why 30 people had sat in a beige clubhouse and nodded along, why the insinuation about our type of visitor had gone unchallenged in that room. It bothered me. Not the legal fight, that was winnable, and we won it, but the underlying thing it had surfaced. So in the spring, we launched something we called the Winslow Ridge Agricultural Community Scholarship, 2 annual awards of $2,500 each for high school students from the county pursuing education in agriculture, viticulture, food science, or environmental conservation. We funded it from the settlement. The scholarship is open to any student from the county, any student. We also partnered with the County Extension Office to host a free monthly educational series in the tasting room. Soil science, water management, pest identification, small-scale fermentation. Open to any farmer or aspiring farmer in the region. Boyd teaches the tractor maintenance session. He is, predictably, excellent at it. The first scholarship recipients were announced at our Fall Harvest Festival in October. Grandpa Elbert's Viognier was pouring. The band was back. Tilford Crane was there with his wife, who, it turns out, is a fantastic cook and brought a pie that lasted approximately 8 minutes on the dessert table. The vines were stripped and the rows were quiet, and the air smelled like autumn and wood smoke, and the first cold nights coming down off the Blue Ridge. I walked the rows at dusk again, the way I used to with Grandpa Elbert, and I thought about what he'd said when he planted the first 12 rows in 2009. Something about land being an argument you make with time, a bet that what you build will still be here when the people who tried to stop you are long gone. He was right about the Viognier. He was right about that too.